Hello and welcome everyone to today's Association for Manufacturing Excellence webinar titled The Role of Sales in a Lean Enterprise. I am Jerry Strohmeyer, the Education and Training Program Coordinator for AME, and I will be your moderator. Today's presenter is Joseph Dagger, the President of Business 901, a firm specializing in bringing continuous improvement process to the sales and marketing arena. Joe has over 30 years of experience and is a Lean Six Sigma Black Belt. He has participated with companies involved in retail, manufacturing, software, and professional services. In these companies, Joe developed and implemented sales and marketing strategies. Joe is a process thinker and has attached Lean to the way of implementing sales and marketing and has advanced those practices through design thinking and service design concepts. Before we start, just a couple of housekeeping items. You will be in listen-only mode throughout the webinar. You will see that you are muted on your attendee panel on the right side of your screen. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them into your question area in the attendee panel and click on Submit. We'll review the questions at the end of today's presentation and answer as many as we can. When you log off today, please check your email inbox, and it will be an invitation and link to fill out a short webinar attendee survey. Please take a few minutes to complete the survey today, as your feedback is very important to us to improve future webinars. Joe has also graciously agreed to provide a PDF of today's presentation. We will be sending that along with a recorded link for a webinar replay to each of you next week. Now, I am pleased to introduce Joseph Dager, who will present the role of sales in the Lean Enterprise. Take it away, Joe.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jerry. As she mentioned, I'm Joe Dager of Business 901, and I'd like to thank Jerry and AME for the opportunity to present to their audience. The webinar is muted, but there'll be time for a few questions afterwards, as she said, and I will also offer anyone the opportunity here to connect to me on LinkedIn or through my website. If you mention AME, I'll send you a complimentary ebook on marketing with PDCA. When we start out, there are a lot of people out there, including many of you that are more astute than Lean than me. Others may be pretty good at sales and marketing. What makes me somewhat different is that there's only a few of us in the field of Lean marketing. There's just not a lot of people on that bridge. So depending on who I get to talk to, I get to be usually pretty smart either in Lean or in sales. It's sort of like having one foot in a bucket of ice and the other in boiling water. So in a mixed crowd, I might come across average here. But however, presenting on this subject for half a dozen years now, and in those years, most of the audiences are lacking marketing folks and seldom, if any, salespeople. And because of that, I wonder, have we ever taken the time to identify the value Lean will provide to sales and marketing? So before moving on, what is your company's business objective for using Lean in sales and marketing? I'd like for you to jot that down before we start, or at least make a mental note of it. But there's one, well, maybe two stipulations. You cannot use the words effective or efficient. Part of the reason is because I'm going to probably use them here. In the past, when talking to most organizations, they're looking for one thing and one thing only: streamline sales. Work on the process. Because we're process people. We want to make things better, faster, and cheaper. Many Lean consultants or trainers would approach sales and marketing perspective from this view. They would apply it on a typical project-by-project basis to marketing activities like promotion and distribution, and extend the waste and cost-cutting focus of Lean efforts to sales and marketing in an attempt to make those activities more efficient, more repeatable, and even dig in a little deeper with less variation. Everyone knows that the undisciplined and creative activities that define sales and marketing offer a rich treasure trove of cost savings when made more disciplined and structured. But does that allow Lean to grow market share or top-line revenues? And to do those things, what do we need? We need metrics, data. It is the process way of doing things. And now that we have big data, we have all the quantitative data we need and want. But what about the qualitative? And who best to collect that data than our salespeople? So I asked, how many improvement initiatives for sales have just added layers of forms, procedures, meetings, and approvals for them? You know, we want pull in lean sales, right? But lots of times we have to figure out, is it operations pulling on that sales guy or the customer pulling on operations? Or both of them pulling on the sales guy? Is there an alternative to this? Well, others have thought so. They've introduced lean to sales through a product development lens, that design thinking style. Maybe even lean 3P, lean startup, or a chapter from IDEO. But I'd say there's even further fragmentation among those disciplines. You know, in design thinking, like IDEO, is more human-centered and collaborative, whereas lean 3P drives internal development practices. Lean startup seeks product service market fit. I think all add a rather unique approach to lean thinking, and all of them are popular approaches in the lean sales and marketing literature now. Maybe even more so than that typical process thinking I previously outlined. The reason is that many would argue that the process approach of lean is about incremental improvement. It does not allow for breakthrough thinking. I think there are other issues. You know, many visualize the marketing cycle through the use of funnel thinking or how it narrows down to the actual purchase of the product. You know, that's a linear approach to predict, plan, and proceed. And I think that's a dangerous way to advance. This approach prematurely foresees a solution for the customer without truly understanding their needs. As we work our way down the funnel, it's just as likely evidence will mount that the proposed solution is wrong. However, we have so much invested, we attempt to sway the course of action in our favor. Linear planning actually increases the risk for a customer to engage in an inappropriate course of action. And I think this approach was popularized when we had something we called demand. Funnels are useful tools to have a conversation about. But the truth is that more and more sales processes and customers are unique. So how do sales and marketing folks perceive lean? Well, they think you're going to come in there, value stream map their process, collect data for your improvement efforts, and they're not sure who's pulling and who is pushing and what the customer involvement is. I don't want to beat up on both of those other processes or anything, or any process. I think the message is not that any of these processes, these things are wrong. They just both offer a prescription for success, a perceived outcome, that you do it my way, it will work. Often, we lead with process. We lead with tools. The alternative may be to lead with thinking. You know, if you're going to introduce lean thinking to sales and marketing, we'd probably start with the 5 core concepts of lean, right? By Womack and Jones. As value, we all know them. As value is specified, value streams are identified, wasted steps are removed, and flow and pull introduced, and we begin the process again and continue until a state of perfection is reached, in which perfect value is created with no waste. That may be our target, but in the mind of sales and marketing, it is a different current state. As a sales guy, I have a hard time identifying with those concepts. When I'm thinking of value, I'm thinking of what Theodore Levitt said 50 years ago. He would argue that people don't want to buy a drill, people want a hole in the wall. When sales guys look at value, They look at how a customer uses the product or the service, the job that needs to be done. When salespeople look at value streams, we are looking at how a customer arrives at their point of use, their decision process. When we think of flow, we are thinking how easy it is for the customer to buy, to get a proposal, and the reliability of my company to meet market windows. Pull is about agility and being adaptive. Is that not the promise of a lean operations to sales? Less work in process, more agile, more flexible? Continuous learning. The company that can learn from their customer at a faster rate than the competition is the winner today. Perfection is constantly delivering value faster than your buddies down the street. Now, value, of course, depends on context, but if lean has delivered in your organization, it has created a strategic competitive advantage, not from the idea of better, faster, cheaper. Instead, a lean should allow us to speculate, experiment, measure, and iterate forward. It is a method of learning and adapting faster than your competition. That's the promise of lean to sales. So to introduce the iterative process, lean thinking, to sales and marketing, I do this talking about Kaizen or continuous improvement, which is exemplified in PDCA, or it has been called the Short or Deming cycle. You know, Ono came along, the guru of the Toyota production system, and says there's no improvement without a standard. So in short terminology, in essence, FDCA was created. Recently is innovation. Design thinking had become the buzzword of the day. Eric Ries created the Lean Startup. It was based on build, measure, learn. It is his idea that you develop product and get it into the hands of the customer at its most minimum level and leave the customer decide the value and expand on that. I could argue that what I learned from a Toyota guru in Europe, Graham Hill, that there was similar thinking within Toyota called explore, do, check, act. I like that a bit better, as I believe that it offers a little broader perspective to include those other disciplines I talked about in design thinking and guidance versus just the build, measure, learn. So right or wrong, I base my lean thinking on these principles: standardization, improvement, and exploration. PDCA is the glue. Without that mindset, it is difficult to traverse between the three, and I think all successful companies have a mixture of all three. Some may be more innovative, some may be more standard, but having a practice in place for each is what makes lean successful. I agree that SDCA and PDCA and even the continuous mindset may not deliver a breakthrough by themselves. However, like most things, you start one step at a time. The culture of innovation starts with a culture of continuous improvement. To start with breakthrough thinking is very difficult and risky. You cannot just turn it on, especially in established companies. So starting with PDCA and continuous improvement can be a successful way to create the little I, improvement, culture. This allows for the culture to spread and create the DNA of the big I of innovation. I want to bring up another important point that I think gets lost a lot of times. Those experienced in lean understand the process of PDCA. They understand it as a learning cycle, a hypothesis to be proven. People outside of lean often look at plan do through a project management type lens. It is that thinking of follow the plan, and as we waver off course, we make adjustments to get back to the plan. And we all know that most projects fail, and I can cite statistics, but believe me, they're not good. And this is why in software, they have taken more of that, using Jim Highsmith's words, I guess, speculate, explore, and refine role. They adjust as they learn versus thinking they know everything at the beginning. It is an area that I'm very sensitive with when introducing lean to sales and marketing, because we want to create an environment of learning, not of one staying on plan. We seldom accomplish plan do in a controlled environment within our own internal structures. Why do we think we can do it externally where we don't have control? You know, Peter Schultes appeared on stage with Dr. Deming. He later wrote the Team Handbook and the Leader's Handbook, which are two books that I still reference. I still encourage people to read them. But Peter said, sales and marketing has never been against systemizing the process. They have been against being systemized by the process. The fact is, there's not one part of your company that is more laden with processes and metrics than sales and marketing. What do you think they are thinking when we introduce lean to them as a process or through a set of tools? What we really need to be asking is, have you asked your salespeople how much time they spend in front of a customer? I would venture to say that there's not one more important indicator of increased sales than face time. And it kind of reminds me of this comment. Ask not what sales can do for lean, ask what lean can do for sales. After all, sales are the gateway to value, the gateway to the customer. Our dollars are typically front-loaded at the top of the marketing funnel. We look at marketing to the masses in the hope that we will find a likely candidate and narrow them down through discovering how much pain they are in relative to our product offering. We are constantly trying to optimize those funnels, thinking it will make them more effective. I call this method marketing through depletion. And it has been said over and over again in the B2B world, 60% of the selling cycle is over by the time we get invited. I like to market to a funnel of opportunity through the 5 R's of growth. The greatest growth opportunities are on the edges of the use of our products and services, or on the edges of the 5 R's of growth. We could call it the rims if I needed another R, but we must make a concentrated effort to identify and participate in relevant knowledge flows on the edges of those 5 R's. A physical example of this is Starbucks, a lean company, by the way, and a practitioner of TWI. How do they open a store? It is always adjacent to another store, knowing that they will take 25% of that business away from the existing store. And by doing this, they just about address every one of those 5 R's. And maybe even a little of the 6, the rim, by gathering a few fence sitters into the fold. They have to be doing something right. You drive by a coffee shop and even a McDonald's with empty lines, have empty lines, and the Starbucks next door has 7 lines, 7 cars lined up. But we talk about adaptable or agile, but few of us really know what that means. We may talk about being customer-centric or customer-focused, but for both of those to take place, we must develop a sales and marketing system that incorporates a structure that values long-term type thinking with a short-term process of regular review and assessment that can be adjusted or changed. We must recognize that sales is not just about a transactional exchange of value at a moment of time, but part of an ongoing investment in customers as appreciating assets. Remember the time when we sold and just hung on during the warranty, hoping service and support did not break us? The quality movement in lean helped change that. It may have changed us so well that many of us are making our decisions based on the lifetime value of a customer. So we need a reliable system that incorporates both long-term thinking with a short-term process of regular review. In recent years, there's been a rise of popularity in Toyota Kata, as demonstrated in the slide by Mike Rother. Using the improvement and the coaching kata gives us a forum for continuous improvement to overcome the resistance to change and to develop deliberate practice in the discipline of lean. It may be even sales. What I like about the kata process is that it moves away from that project management thinking of planning and doing to a more adaptive way of thinking, speculating, exploring. Just as Deming changed check to study to make PDSA, I think we must understand that plan do should not be taken out of context. I think kata helps frame this discussion. As we move through kata, we adjust and adapt. Just think of using a Kanban board for a typical client or even a marketing segment. As we move through the process, we overcome obstacles or learning opportunities. If you're unfamiliar with the Kanban board, it is used quite extensively in software. It was popularized by David Anderson, Jim Benson, and Corey Ladis. There are two simple rules to Kanban: visualize work and limit work in process. For example, a team may be limited to working on only 2 obstacles at a time. This looks good, maybe for a small company or for a startup, but how might it look for a large company? A lean enterprise, maybe. What if we were marketing in Toyota? Co-authors Leiker and Meyer of the Toyota Way Field Book created the pyramid of the supplier partnering hierarchy of Toyota that consisted of these 7 steps. This is how you become a valued partner at Toyota. For example, we would stay in the first steps maybe when we were first introduced to achieving a level of SDCA and applying PDCA till we succeeded at the next step of mutual, the next step of interlocking structures. Over the years, as we develop as a partner, we become more embedded into the Toyota way. Looking deeper at Toyota's first step, the process of mutual understanding. They based this on key elements of trust, mutual prosperity, respect for each other, and Gitcha Gembutsu. Actual part, actual place. Till we achieve this, it gives us little reason to proceed. Our efforts should go through the PDCA stages to achieve each of the key elements as defined. In the ACT stage, we arrive at a control point to see if there are indications that Toyota is interested in initiating discussion about an alliance structure, independent processes, and or parallel sourcing. If there's no interest, we must continue our efforts in another cycle of gaining mutual understanding. Remember that EDCA thing I talked about? Want to take a giant step or explore the next step? Maybe you throw a new approach in one of the areas like information sharing. How would you perceive an approach to all this? And could we perceive these components of each step to be an obstacle? Now, I like to think of it as a way of creating and gaining knowledge for the customer and myself, not necessarily an obstacle. But linear thinking, prescriptive processes, and practices are becoming less successful in today's world. Instead, we must speculate, experiment, and adapt. Peter Drucker had a catchy statement: efficiency is doing things right. Effectiveness is doing the right thing. If you have enough foresight to know with certainty what the right thing is in advance, then efficiency is a fitting substitution for effectiveness. But in the world of sales and marketing, the correlation between efficiency and effectiveness breaks down. An example is in General McChrystal's book, Team of Teams. He talks about a task force in Iran. Here we had the greatest army in the world with the most sophisticated weaponry and data available. We couldn't keep up. The model and the leader development process was just really out of date. He said, we We often demand unrealistic levels of knowledge in leaders and force them into ineffective attempts to micromanage. The temptation to lead as a chess master, controlling each move of the organization, must give way to an approach as a gardener, enabling rather than directing. A gardening approach to leadership is anything but passive. The leader acts as an eyes-on, hands-off enabler who creates and maintains an ecosystem in which the organization operates. When we think of lean and how we empower a line worker, are we thinking the same way for a salesperson? Are we giving them an and-on, or are we asking them to follow a prescription? Are we showing the same respect with an eyes-on, hands-off approach? Reverting to a Kanban board, and we go back to that Toyota partnering hierarchy. This could be our main visual task board or our roadmap for a long-term relationship with Toyota. Or you can think of it even as a marketing segment, because I got a couple customers that are smaller market segments than just a Toyota. But as you can see, I take each of these steps and break them apart into the cards as we go through the process, visualizing work and limiting work and process. Each card, of course, contains a thread of knowledge-building activities to include attachments, comments, etc. And I have color-coded each step. And not each step has to be done in order. We may have an opportunity that allows us to complete a step beforehand. We can also break the work down to smaller boards or swim lanes for individual teams or people. We can create a standard work board for the steps that we need to maintain. And the steps we need to improve, we would create a PDCA board, and also the ones we need to explore, EDCA. Notice that I was a bad person and just copied the boards with a different colored background. In reality, the cards would only have one home on one swim lane. You know, we set the target condition on some stretch goal and the obstacles on our performance gap. Think of this as one of the cards, maybe, just one of the obstacles in place. You know, most of us focus on the wrong problem, which is choosing us, the supplier, than rather aiming for the target condition or the job the customer needs done, their gap. I think lots of times we need to stop looking at just fitting our solution to customer problems. We need to see customers as valued investments in who the customer wants to become, their target condition. From that position, we can see how we can adapt to the desired outcome. Most of us think on how the customer would adapt to use our product. And as I had mentioned before, in the B2B world, when you're getting invited to this decision table at 60% of it has been completed, we may not have the opportunity to ask them to adapt. Maybe, just maybe, it is our responsibility to adapt. And when I discuss adaptation, don't think of this thing that we have to create an innovative new product for every customer. Adaptation is as much about turning things off sometimes as it is creating new things. And we'll discuss that a little bit in a moment. But let's look at other segments or a broader scope for a second. You really cannot have a conversation about marketing without segmentation, can you? The basic metrics allows us to have a pretty high-level conversation without trying to view value streams or product families and such. Let's just view growth through the existing or non-existing customers and their unmet needs. In actuality, this looks more fluid as the individual matrices, depending on product or service, will be configured more like a puzzle. Using this metrics, but adding lean thinking to the concept, nothing changes, except we now assign a lean scenario to achieve the outcomes in each individual box. As I said before, we find our greatest growth opportunities on the edges or the use of our products or services. I kind of look at this as that your SDCA may come out and be really like this when you start putting customers inside these boxes. And then your PDCA would be along the edges here, changes that need, and out around here somewhere. And then maybe the EDCA is the edges all around the outside of it. You know, as I said before, we find our greatest growth opportunities on the edges of the use of our products and services. We must make that concentrated effort to identify and participate in those relevant knowledge flows on the edges. Think about the core being standard work of your sales strategy, or even maybe the automated part of it. PDCA provides the bridge between the core and the edge. You know, what does the lean startup look like? The lean startup will look something like this. The cycle of lean startup is where your resources are until you provide product market fit. After doing that, you will not standardize your product immediately. Instead, you'll conduct PDCA till a standard market and customer becomes well-defined. Now, this would be a pattern found in established companies. Of course, if you believe, which I do, that you must have a profitable and well-differentiated core, most of your resources will be allocated to SCCA. You know, standards are the most fundamental and misunderstood concept needed for growth. Your core values are the way you go about what you do and how you do it. It is what your customer understands and experiences. Standards create the wow in your business. You know, when an employee steps out of the box to do something remarkable, it is a result of having the clarification that this is what our standards, our values, would encourage us to do. In the model, we deal so often with existing customers. However, within these customers are new customers, with an average of more than 5 people needing to sign off on a purchase decision. This should not be looked as restrictive, but further opportunity to build into a customer base. It creates an opportunity to participate in today's buzzwords of co-creation and collaboration. But the nurturing thing, because I want to mention, if you review the Toyota partnering hierarchy again, for an example, that shared understanding, joint Kaizen, was at the top. It is a journey to get there with any company. Now I'm going to take a few more moments to introduce a few tools before the Q&A and ways I've been seeing lean applied in organizations from the sales and marketing perspective. I like to use TWI, training within industry. I show the J programs as a way of demonstrating a way to use them. Again, in actuality, remember, this looks more fluid as I drew before. You know, but I use it because it starts defining different skill sets and resources needed within our sales process. An example of how TWI might be used is I work with a fair amount of SaaS companies, software as a service. We even use 6S, implementing the data structure. Instead of that safety nomenclature that became 6S, I use security in there. But my work often is in developing that second S, service, to be as big as the first S, software. TWI can be used with onboarding processes or even used effectively in those R's that I keep mentioning. When we introduce new software, most of the time it is on a trial basis. Afterwards, we create use through the human components of TWI. Remember, the software is often sold on a subscription basis. So the importance of creating use is very important from a SaaS perspective. Most of us familiar with TWI know that the majority of the training in it has been in the area of job instruction. When we think about sales, we immediately think about job relations, right? I think TWI offers a greater opportunity. We spend most of our time training sales and support people to introduce our product and service to our customer. job method is without question the most underused component of the J programs. I believe it was originally developed for the industrial engineer to sell and get their ideas to management and to operations to sell within the company. What about using JM for sales to construct the message from the customer into our development and or operations? What about having an effective lean way to bring the message in? One of the best ways to teach PDCA outside of kata is through the use of A3s. The left-sided 11 by 17 page identifies your problems and sets your targets. The right side handles the problem-solving process, developing countermeasures and standardizing the work. You know, sales and marketing has plenty of tools, as I mentioned before. I encourage people to leave sales and marketing folks to use your own, but introduce the A3 to teach the iterative process, and most of all, teach the power of visualization. The problem-solving A3 report is the most common and is the basis for other uses of A3, such as proposals and status reports. You know, an A3 has been called the thinking form, and it's the structure that Toyota used to enact PDCA throughout the organization. A3 thinking trains our sales teams to walk through the problem-solving structure to create that little eye of continuous improvement, defining problems and recognizing gaps. When we do this, we start thinking differently. This is where we're at. This is where we want to go. How do we prioritize to select our next countermeasure? What will we do to accomplish this? Did we accomplish it? Or do we need to go at it again? You know, this sounds really basic to lean practitioners, but it gives us a path from that plan, do of project planning to that iterative thinking of countermeasures and experiments. And A3 is in essence a form of adaptive planning. It is not about solutions. It is about countermeasures. It's about iterative planning. Think of this as a way to enrich the sales conversation, not just a way to solve problems. Marketing communication departments can be coordinated with the sales team directly or through a team coordinated. These blocks depict the typical marketing department and are the foundation of our marketing efforts. There could be all kinds of more blocks. I just pulled a few of them up. But marketing used to define the strategy, sales executed it, and was more operational. Anymore, sales is way too expensive to keep in an operational perspective. Salespeople now develop relationships with key accounts and nurture those relationships, like I demonstrated with the Toyota hierarchy. And also to innovate and to develop new products. Bring those to the table. What comes through these relationships if we choose to capture them, or as, whoops, I must add a timer on that one. But what comes through these relationships if we choose to capture them, or as those products or services are created, marketing then is given the opportunity to grow them. Gathering those peoples or orgs or, or companies on the edge, the rim of those 5 R's. What it comes down to is the changing landscape is that sales is becoming way more strategic. Marketing is becoming way more operational. Now, as I mentioned before, so when we look at this, it's no longer about mapping and scripting. It is about knowledge building and learning. Salespeople return from an external world that has afforded them the opportunity to explore, converse, share ideas, and ask questions. They are often met upon the return to a restrictive internal world. I don't think you should go down that path. I think it's a prescription for cost savings, not for growth. Making connections to what is known and what needs to be learned is today's sales funnel. It is just as important for sales and marketing to get the message in as it is to get the message out. But don't confuse that message to mean more data, less face time. We use PDCA to provide a flexible structure and create a team with shared responsibility and authority for a successful outcome. The idea is to capture an effective way for teams to work, share, and capture knowledge during the lifetime of a customer. PDCA is a people process that emphasizes learning by doing, and as a result, focuses on making things happen. Teams are facing new challenges that are solved by collective thought. This collective thinking needs to be done internally, externally, and across organizations. It doesn't come naturally. Paraphrasing the message from Highsmith again, when discussing adaptive leadership. Plans evolve from what we know. Plans evolve from what we know. SDCA. Adaptions are responses to learning what we don't know. PDCA. Flexibility is the responses to changes we expect in the future. EDCA. The role of sales in a lean enterprise must encompass all three dimensions: standard work, continuous improvement, and exploration. Your competitive landscape is changing from a defined design build to one based on adoption. The cost of adoption and the cost of integrating new products and services are spiraling downward. Great products and services, may no longer be created. They may simply just evolve. What is the business case for lean in sales and marketing? I think a lean mindset creates the ability to learn from your customer at a faster rate than your competition. It is really your competitive advantage. You might ask, what would I do on Monday morning to get started? Should you jump into kata training for all your salespeople? What about TWI? What about A3? What about even step-based design that we might talk about? But my advice is just to start. Start talking about lean thinking, what it means to sales. If your organization does A3s well, approach sales with the idea of learning lean through A3s. If you are successful with other approaches, use those. Don't leave the process overwhelmed with thinking. It brings me back to an old saying that I learned a long time ago. And I don't even know who to contribute it to, but, how many good ideas get wasted because of a poor plan? Leave lean evolve in your organization. And when you are successful with lean, you will stop calling it lean because you'll call it your own. Thanks, everyone. Jerry, do you have any questions from anyone or that I can help with?
Okay, great. As I mentioned earlier, if you do have any questions for Joe, please submit them on the right side of your screen. And we have one here. Can lean save us money, reduce costs in the sales process?
I think without question. And I think the reason is using the process of SCCA, PDCA, and EDCA, that I talked about. It allows for understanding and delivering on the needs of those customers much more specifically. One area that I find is often ignored is knowledge building and step-based design, which it was a nice lead-in because I mentioned that at the end and didn't really explain it. But most of you are familiar with online support systems, let's say like a Zendesk. And we create these knowledge centers for customers with our supporting ticketing system, articles, and community. But I don't think we ever construct similar, I've very seldom seen similar thinking for our salespeople. And why do we not have as good, if not better, support structure built for them? Because I go back to that set-based design thinking from Toyota, where GM had 100 mufflers for 100 cars. And Toyota had like 5 for 70 cars or something. But the point is is not to standardize every process, but adapt existing information that is readily accessible across the board. You know, if we have customizable templates there, if we have things that are ready to use and people can grab that support structure and allocate it, they know what to use in a post-purchase or before-purchase type things that is available and the comments can be made. It's that support structure that we need to develop within our sales teams that I seldom see, and I think that's the real cost in it, savings.
Okay, great. Thank you. Shouldn't sales have a vested interest in leveling production?
Ooh, the idea of level production is awesome. And maybe it's something that could happen, and I think it could have happened in a demand when we lived in a world where demand exceeded supply, but it's getting tougher because that's not today's world. When I hear that, I think the fundamental concept of lean might be missing. I believe the natural pull, the demand from the customer is what we should strive for. And, you know, if leveling production is good for us, why should it not be for the customer? What are we missing in our delivery to the customer to be able to achieve that? Where, you know, and where have we let them down? Or is, you know, or our idea of leveling production based on our own batch quantities that we should be getting rid of, maybe.
Okay, thanks. Next question is, what if the organization has not defined the difference between sales and marketing?
Well, it's, you know, I think there is, in the lean sense, I look at more of lean sales teams, and I think of the marketing kind of, I think there is a definite distinction between them. If we, you know, when we're talking about outside teams and customer-facing teams, I think of that as more the salespeople, and I think and then I think of marketing communications and what we're done. If there's not a defined difference, I think that's okay, because lean is really trying to incorporate the whole system itself and to be a complement to each other. I think a marketing, you know, there should be direct connection. I just think customer-facing people are typically the obvious sales structure. Okay, so I think that you look at it as from a whole because they're so intertwined. I mean, some people will have separate departments, other people will have sales working for marketing, but it always seems the sales guy's promoted, okay? As the VP then or whatever, but so I'm not sure who's over who, but and from a lean perspective, I don't see a reason that should be a hindrance in putting lean into the operation. I think lean thinking will define the process better and make not necessarily departments, but a more continuous process and more combination because they'll be on the same teams. So I don't know if that's a good answer to that question, but I'm not sure that there's.
Okay.
I would like to see the structure because I think that everything's kind of a Venn diagram versus a typical org chart, and that's how I look at things. So I think there's always overlap. Okay,
great. Next question is, can you explain how you see the principle of flow is applied within sales and marketing?
I think I don't like to necessarily use the word flow as much as I like to use the word rhythm. There should be a certain cadence of delivery within sales and marketing to the customer, and all customers and all market segments and value streams may have a different rhythm. So we're looking for that flow to be dictated somewhat by the customer process. That's why I kind of use the Kanban board, and I talked about that very early in the process, is that we adapt to our customer's need, and that flow is really a dictation of them, and we adjust to their rhythm. I don't think you can sit there and, you know, manage flow in an external perspective. I think it's more of the adaptation, the agility to and create a certain rhythm of delivery, okay, to the customer that that exceeds their expectation.
Okay. The next one is, how can sales help make production more agile?
I think sales, by bringing in, okay, those ideas, okay, from the customer, okay, and as I said, from the adaptation standpoint, okay, I'll just go a little bit away from that a little bit for a second, and then jump back into it. You know, the Challenger Sale, which is a great book written by Matt Dixon on sales, and he showed 5 types of salespeople that you'll recognize in an instant. You know, hard worker, relationship builder, lone wolf, reactive problem solver, and the challenger. Okay, across all areas, you know, you can kind of think all sales guys are individuals and have them, but the one of them 5 that exceeded, okay, all the others as the star performer was the challenger, and he had the most assertive, and he was the most assertive and had the deeper understanding of the customer's business. And I think that's the point of sales, the knowledge building thing, is to be able to bring the customer's unique perspectives to the table, and to understand the individual customer's value drivers better. Bringing that knowledge inside, okay, to our organization allows us to do 2 things. One, it allows us to standardize our processes better, that we can deliver quicker in a more standard process, but it also helps us with set-based design, that we can adapt our existing things to customers and learn what their needs are better. So the agility side is bringing the customer knowledge to the table.
Okay, thank you. Next question. We are in a high-mix, low-volume environment. We often struggle to either make low volumes cost-competitive, or customers want larger batches to minimize documentation processing. How can sales address this issue?
Again, I think it goes back to understanding why those larger batches, okay? Is it cost-effective for the person? Is the way that they do business, okay? And it's up to us to somewhat adapt to them and learn. Sales, and I go back to the challenger guy, you know, he can pressure a customer. He can, you know, he understands and has the relationship with the customer. That's why sales will never go away. You know, people think we can automate sales. Do we really need sales and all the other stuff? And I think there will be always more automation taking place, more automated sales taking place. But that relationship and that understanding of the customer is heightened. And with understanding the needs of a customer, we talk about that. But when you're a lean guy, you look at things differently. And I think that's why it's so imperative for lean to be brought into the sales arena, is because I had a good conversation with Art Byrne one time, and how they were acquiring companies and things like that, you know, in years past. And, you know, and I just would laugh at him a little bit, because when we talked about it, I said, when you walked into a company, you saw things differently. You saw where flow wasn't being established. You understood that, you know, putting a U-shaped cell over here could increase and do so much more. But if a lean sales guy understands lean and starts defining gaps and things, he starts looking at things differently. He starts recognizing how he can help and improve a customer's process. And if we truly believe lean will do that for us, we oftentimes will find out ways lean will do that for a customer. So when I'm thinking of this large volume, you know, in batch type situation from that, is, you know, it's a process. You're not going to walk in there and do it tomorrow, but it's a learning process. And as we go up the hierarchy with our suppliers and have better relationships with them, I think we'll see things and identify things to them. And that's a great example of the challenger sale, is that as he develops a deeper understanding of a customer's business, he'll make suggestions that'll make the customer make customers money. And if those areas like that can be developed, it should make us money too.
Great. Another question is, where do I start with my sales team?
I think if I had two things, the first thing I was going to do with any sales team is visualize the process. Visualize what they're doing now, accept what is current state. I wouldn't try to fix anything. I think that's our biggest problem. We go in there and we try to, and I hate to pick on value stream mapping because I think it's a great, great product and a great tool to use. But we go in there and we try to value stream map the process, for lack of a thing, and get the waste out of it and stuff. And I think we've got to be careful about that. And I think we truly need to understand the process. And that's where I think that we struggle with, because we're not used to the external world. We're process people. And so we need to become more adaptive. So if I'm going to start with the salespeople, I'm going to start with them, okay, understanding their process and what they do. And then I'm going to say, what can be standardized? What do we need to improve on? Okay, and what do we need to start doing? And if you think of it that way, it's simply SCCA, PDCA, and EDCA. And I would start with, okay, we're going to improve one thing. Michael Valley told me one thing is lean is not a revolution. It's doing one, correcting one thing at a time and do it. All the lean people that I've talked to, the great leaders I've talked to in my podcast, I've done like over 300 podcasts, and I've talked to from John Toussaint to at Theta Care and to Art Byrne I just mentioned before, and others. They have all said if there was one thing that they could do over, and these are guys that succeeded with lean, did a great job, is that they probably would have tried to do less. And I always thought that was so overwhelming to me to hear that. I thought, it really just, was like, God, and it wasn't a question I asked. It's something that came out in the conversation with all of them. So what that tells me is that they really want mastery over something. So I would look at what I was really good at. I kind of use that appreciative inquiry type thing. What I really good at, whether it was TWI, CATA, or A3s. And I would help sales with that process, and I would develop a current state, pick one thing, do one thing, and and make that successful.
Okay. One more question: can lean help eliminate forecasting?
I go back. I'm not sure to eliminate, but and I always look at forecasting. What is the reason we need to predict the future, right? That's what a forecast is. Is it because operations need better numbers to adjust work in process or their inventory levels? So if we give them better numbers, do they become less lean? So I hate to say it that way, but I wonder what is the prediction, the actual variance we're trying to determine? And because the forecast is always wrong. And we're using past history to predict the future, right? And we can use predictive analytics, which I believe is best, okay, if you have those type of numbers. And I'm not a number crunching guy. So how well analytics can predict the future, I need to leave it to Eric Siegels and the Kaiser Fungs of the world. But from my perspective, I like to use scenario thinking approach that we can, we can paint a picture of some different outcomes we foresee, and then create a path on how we might arrive at them. Then we can start putting a little bit of numbers to those. And if we use that SCA thinking, we'll be pretty certain of what's going to happen there, I think. And we'll use the PDCA if we're going to try to change too much, just a little, or that, we have okay numbers with the PDCA. If we're trying to predict the future based on EDCA and developing a new products and stuff, we got a little bit more of a gamble. And because if we're trying to take market share away from people, it is said that it takes at least a threefold advantage to get someone to change. And what that tells me is that it's going to cost something to take market share away. So depending upon how much growth you expect, it really will depend on how well you do with your forecasting. You stay within the SCCA realms, I think you can be pretty accurate with forecasting, or somewhat accurate with your existing analytics. But as you move away from that, it's really about scenario thinking. It's about, we have to refine our story a little bit based on current knowledge and be able to really adapt to it as we go on. So as I think that Lean certainly will help, because we should be creating more standard work as we move Lean to the sales process and leaving our sales guys become more strategic thinkers and out there on the edge of where they should be. So in essence, I think your forecasting should get better with Lean.
Okay, great. Thank you for your questions, and any questions that are still outstanding, I'll reach out to Joe and try and get you an answer for that. And thank you, Joe, for a very insightful presentation. This brings our webinar to a close. Our next webinar will be on Friday, July 10th, titled Lean Accounting Principles, Practices, and Tools with Brian Maskell. Please visit AME.org under the AME Events and Training tab for more information and to register. And don't forget to fill out the short survey that will be in your inbox. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and have a productive day.